Welcome to Detroit. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass. You can drown them. And that's what we gotta be. That's who we have to be. Because that's our domain. That is our domain. Because we'll tread water as long as it takes to fucking bury you.
Takes the snap, turns, gives to Montgomery, right side, end zone, touchdown, Detroit Lions! Yes.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions friends, fans, and family members. Welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike. And as always, we're diving on in. So folks, obviously we know that with this upcoming game against the Chicago Bears, there's a lot of people that are looking for one of two things to happen. They're either looking for the Lions to completely continue to fall apart in their own mind, in their own perspective, or what lesser people are looking for, which I'm one of them, is they're looking for the Lions to have a bounce-back game. They're looking for the Lions to find a way to come back from the loss that they had against the Green Bay Packers and to be able to respond by bouncing back against their other rival, the Chicago Bears. Now, when it comes to that whole side of the conversation, a lot of people are going to then be like, okay, well, how do they do it? What is the way they bounce back? What is the method of their attack by bouncing back? Well, I'm not going to say that there's one particular method of attack that's going to supersede another. Because I believe that there's going to be a bounce-back game in one aspect for the offense, and I believe there's going to be a bounce-back game in one aspect for the defense. For today's episode, obviously, my title includes talking about the offense. So what exactly do I think the Lions' offense is going to do in order to bounce back against the Chicago Bears? Well, what it comes down to, honestly, is how, a certain player has performed in the past against the Bears in the sense of who their coach is on defense, which their defensive coordinator is Dennis Allen. But it also has to do with the fact of how, hey, there's other things that you have to factor into a game before you get to the game. So, let's first and foremost understand who the defensive coordinator of the Bears is. As I said, that's Dennis Allen. Now, Dennis Allen is one of those guys who has been considered one of the better, or if not the best defensive-minded coaches in the NFL for quite a while. He's not been considered one of the better head coaches. He's been a head coach twice in his NFL career, and let's call it for what it is. His second go-around was a little bit better than his first, but not by much. But when it comes to him being a defensive coordinator, he's almost always considered one of the better ones. However, there is one player, and I'm not saying it's the only player, but there's one player that the Lions have that over the course of virtually ever since he's gotten into the league and has gone up against Dennis Allen on multiple occasions, that has always seemed to be able to find a way to play well against Dennis Allen's defenses. That is Jared Goff. And I know some people are like, oh, this is going to be another Goff episode. No, it's not going to be another Goff episode. I'm just using this as a main point, which I'm going to build with a lot of other main points. Because let me put something out there for you. Jared Goff, if I recall correctly, has gone up against Dennis Allen's defenses at least, I think, 5 or 6 times. All of them, of course, while he was with the Saints. And I'm talking about Dennis Allen. Most of the times that Jared Goff has gone up against Dennis Allen with the Saints were when he was with the Los Angeles Rams. But he has had one time where he's done it with the Detroit Lions. But if you take a look at Jared Goff's career stats versus Dennis Allen's defenses over, the entire span of his career, so going back to 2016, this is what Jared Goff has done. He's completed 111 passes out of 168 attempts for 66.1 completion percentage rate, almost 1,500 passing yards for 8.7 an average, 11 passing touchdowns for 6.5 touchdown percentage rate per throw, 3 interceptions for a 1.8 interception percentage rate per throw, and 107.6 passer rating. That right there ought to tell you something. If a quarterback is consistently playing at that high of a level against another coach's defense, that would lead me to believe that, okay, you have done this over multiple years, you've done this with multiple different coaches, you've done this with multiple different sets of players. Obviously, you as a quarterback are able to understand what is the best method of attack against that type of defense. Because let's think about this. It's not just the types of players and coaches that the player on offense have, that's Goff. It's also the types of coaches and players that the defensive coordinator, Dennis Allen, has had at his disposal over all of those times that they've played. So that's one side of that coin. The other side of the coin is, as I said, okay, that's the career stats. Well, how did Jared Goff do in the one time with the Detroit Lions against Dennis Allen's defense? Well, here's what he did. In the one game that Jared Goff has gone against in terms of Dennis Allen's defense, that was, if I recall correctly, last year or the year before that, when we played the Saints. Goff was 16 of 25 for 64 completion percentage rate, 213 yards for 8.5 an average a throw, 2 touchdowns for 8 touchdown percentage rate per throw, 0 interceptions for obviously a 0 interception rate percentage per throw, and 107.6 passer rating. So okay there. That's very interesting. I might have that rating wrong because I think I might have copied the same number, but I will check and, obviously correct it if need be. But the point of the matter is that Goff has always played extremely well against Dennis Allen's defenses, whether it's changes in his own personnel and coaches, whether it's changes in Dennis Allen's personnel and coaches. That's a really important point to bear in mind here as we get set to go up against the Bears and Dennis Allen's defense, the same defense, mind you, which absolutely collapsed in the fourth quarter against the Minnesota Vikings on Monday night. That's important to bear in mind. I'm not using it to try and tear down the Bears. I'm just simply saying that is an important point to remember here. Now, when we further go along this whole process, there's other things to consider. When you start thinking about how the Lions performed Sunday against the Packers, that's going to now throw a lot of attention upon, okay, the Lions offense, it obviously wasn't the best it's ever been against the Packers. In fact, it's been one of their worst performances because the Lions offense, it sputtered virtually the whole game. And now, while a lot of people are still going to want to point the finger at John Morton as the reason why the Lions offense, is in the position that it's in, Dan Campbell has stood up very, very many times and has already stated, listen, John Morton's not the problem. I thought he did a good job game planning. I thought he did a good job play calling. The problem is that the players just simply didn't execute. Because everyone's wanting to say, oh, well, it's because the pass blocking wasn't good. No, the pass blocking was good for 3 out of the 5 offensive linemen. That doesn't check out. Oh, well, it's because the Lions didn't do anything to try and open up the passing game down the field. Both Jared Goff and Dan Campbell have said that they called up deep shot plays during that game. They just weren't open. So it has nothing to do with the fact that the play calling was bad, because obviously it wasn't. They did call those plays, they just weren't available, they couldn't actually do anything, and it has nothing to do with the fact that the game plan that Morton put in was not effective, because obviously Goff and Campbell feel that it was effective, they just couldn't execute it. And again, not only have I explained that, but even Campbell himself said, listen, when you have players that don't play up to a certain standard, it makes it very difficult to try and actually do the things that you want to do. And he was specifically talking about the young players, which when you're thinking about that, the 2 guys on offense he's specifically referring to is Mahogany and Ratledge, because those were the 2 full-time starters that we had out there that are very, very young. And again, when you take a look at the PFF grades and you've watched some of the film and you've seen some of the replays, it's not too hard to figure out that that's who he's referring to. So when you put that into perspective, it's like, okay, here. The one thing you can take from that and then build upon that point that I just made is that when Campbell was talking about those poor performances, which then, as we're now trying to move past those performances and now we're moving into playing against the Bears, what did Campbell specifically say about those young players and about those performances that he thought weren't very good? He said that the only way to go is up, and up we will go. I am convinced that the Lions' performance on Sunday against the on Sunday against the Packers, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, was an anomaly. It's not a new norm. This team is beyond way too good to accept that performance and are so full of personal pride in what they do and their own standard as to what they will accept to not let either the performance that happened on Sunday define them or be what they're going to be and accept it moving forward. The Lions recognize where they went wrong. The Lions recognize what went wrong. There obviously wasn't good communication. Obviously, the players were not as prepared as the coaches thought they were going into that game, which means, okay, we have to tweak a couple things. So, when you put all that into perspective as far as also with what I said about Goff having a very good track record against Dennis Allen's defense, it already stands to reason that this upcoming game against the Bears, everything should be a lot better because it's like, okay, we know where we went wrong, we know what we need to do to correct it, we know what we need to do to start making changes. And I'm not saying the changes are going to happen overnight. Very unlikely that's going to happen. Could it? Yes. Unlikely though. But what you're looking for is a great sense of improvement. You're looking for a great sense of progress, which I think that will happen. So that's one side of the aspect. The other thing we have to talk about when we're going into this is now we also have to talk about how Dennis Allen's defense did against the team they just played, which is the Minnesota Vikings, which that is an interesting conversation in and of itself because that offense was being led by, in essence, a rookie quarterback. Now, yes, I know J.J. McCarthy's not a rookie. He technically was a rookie last year. But this is the first game action that he has ever had, first live NFL game action. So you might as well call him a rookie all the same. So here comes my point. How exactly then did J.J. McCarthy perform with the Vikings in his very first live action game, which also, mind you, was a primetime game, Monday Night Football? That's a pretty tall order to ask for a guy that has not yet played a full live game snap. And what I mean by that is, I mean not preseason. I'm talking about actual, this counts for real. Well, when you take a look at McCarthy's stats, this is what you're going to notice. McCarthy in that game against the Bears on Monday night was 13 of 20 for 65 completion percentage rate. He only had 143 yards for 7.2 an average a throw, but he did have 2 touchdowns. He also had 1 interception, was a pick 6, but he had a 98.5 passer rating with a 52.6 QBR. So, okay, obviously there are ups. Obviously there was a definite down, but overall, for McCarthy's first game, he didn't actually do too bad. Especially against a defense that, has a pretty damn good defensive-minded, coordinator. And on top of that, everybody's been talking about how it's one of the best defenses in terms of all the talent they have assembled on it. So that's how McCarthy did. Well, how did the Vikings' overall offense perform that night? Well, let's take a look at that really quickly. When you take a look at the rushing yards, minus J.J. McCarthy, because I'm going to tell you this right now, when it comes to rushing stats, I don't like including the quarterback's rushing stats in there because 9 times out of 10, those are not designed quarterback plays. It's usually the quarterback drops back and then has to improvise. I'm talking about plays that are absolutely designed as a run, which 95 to 99% of the time comes from the running back. Every so often, it might be a quarterback design run, or it might be a wide receiver screen or something, or boot around the end, whatever the case might be. But in terms of the rushing stats, minus J.J. McCarthy, the Vikings had 95 yards. They were only 25% converting on third down. They had 49 total plays. They had 13 total drives. They had 8 penalties for 50 yards. And they had a time of possession of 27 minutes and 7 seconds. So, okay. You had a quarterback that only threw for 143 yards. He had 2 passing touchdowns. He did have a pick 6. He had at least the bare minimum of passing completion percentage. They had a decent run game. They didn't run a whole lot of plays because they ran less than 50 plays over the course of 13 drives. They did have a couple of penalties. They didn't convert very well on third down. And they held the ball for a decent amount of time as well, almost half the game, but still less than half because it was 3 minutes pretty short of it. So, what does that mean? Overall, the Vikings offense was not by any means prolific in the fact of going up against the Bears. Their passing attack was, for the most part, rather pedestrian in terms of production overall, despite the 2 touchdown throws. Furthermore, you also have to factor in that it wasn't until the fourth quarter that the Vikings actually really started scoring points, because up until the fourth quarter, they had only scored, I think it was, 6 points, if I recall correctly? So, much like the Lions had in the fourth quarter, we hadn't really done a whole hell of a lot. But the difference is that when the Vikings got to the fourth quarter, they then had 3 consecutive scoring drives, which they did in pretty relatively quick succession. Because they had 4 drives in the fourth quarter and they scored on 3 of them. Now, the Lions, on the other hand, as we know, they scored in the fourth quarter, but they only scored on 1 out of the 3 drives they had in the fourth quarter, and that was the last one they had. So, the issue when you're talking about the difference between what the Vikings did against the Bears on Monday night versus what the Lions did against the Packers on Sunday is that when the Vikings got into the red zone or when they had chances to score, they absolutely capitalized on those plays, whether they were in the red zone or not. The Lions, on the other hand, when we were in the red zone, we didn't capitalize on those. We didn't get a chance to get those touchdowns. We had to settle for field goals in some of those cases, or we had a turnover. But the point of the matter is that, in my opinion, and my thought on this, is that the Lions' experience overall, as an overall unit, is going to be something that they're going to take into that game that's going to give them a slight edge over what the Vikings had. Because again, you have a brand new quarterback, which means, okay, everything's not going to be nearly as smooth as what you would like it to be. And then, as I talked about earlier today, the anger from everything that happened, the frustration, the disappointment from what happened last week, that's going to merge together with that experience that they have, and it's going to allow them to get those touchdowns this week that they weren't able to last week, led by, going back to the first main point I made, with Goff leading the way because of the fact of how he's performed against Dennis Allen's defenses in the past. So that's another point, and I believe it will help the Lions moving in the right direction. Now, there's one other thing I want to throw out there, and I want to throw into consideration here really, really quickly. When you talk about the Bears defense, you also have to talk about the health of said defense and also the health of the offense that's getting ready to play, which is obviously the Detroit Lions. Well, the Lions offense, as we know, is completely healthy. We didn't have any players that had any injuries on offense throughout the entire course of the game against the Packers. So already we're in a good spot there. So we should be good to go. The Bears, on the other hand, they're already dealing with injuries to a number of starters. Those being Jalen Johnson, Kyler Gordon, and TJ Edwards. All 3 of those guys did not play in the game against the Vikings on Monday night. However, though, when we take a look at the upcoming game against the Lions on Sunday, of those 3 names that I just mentioned, Jalen Johnson is most likely going to suit up in that game. The reason I can say that is because he went through the pregame warm-up exercises, but was not deemed healthy enough to give it a go. The other 2, on the other hand, there was no chance they were going to play. And chances are, highly, highly likely, they're not going to play this upcoming game either. Because Kyler Gordon, who is their starting nickel corner, they're already pretty much, for a lot of people, already listing him likely as out because he's been dealing with a hamstring and a calf injury, which for a cornerback, you need to have your legs be as close to healthy as possible in order to play. If you're dealing with both a hamstring and a calf injury, and pretty much you didn't have any chance of going before the game started, chances are you're not likely going to be able to go as well for this upcoming game because these are injuries that he sustained at the very end of the preseason. So chances are he's not going to play. That then brings us to the other guy, which is TJ Edwards. TJ Edwards has been dealing with a hamstring injury for quite a bit, and he didn't practice at all last week. Was listed as doubtful before the game even started. So again, chances are he's not going to play either. Well, why is that important? Well, going back to Kyler Gordon, the nickel corner is a guy that comes in when you have 5 defensive backs. That's why they call it a nickel cornerback, because, that means you typically have 3 corners and you typically have 2 safeties. But it can be any combination of the 5, which is why it's called a nickel defense, because, what is a nickel? It's worth 5 cents. That's why it's called nickel defense. Well, typically when you have that extra defensive back, whether it's another safety, whether it's another cornerback, whatever the case might be, they will typically be put onto what is known as the third wide receiver inside of that offense that they're going against. Sometimes it can be something else, but I'm just giving you guys a paraphrase here. Well, why is that big for the Lions? Well, let's consider what we already know about the Lions coming into this game this week. The wide receiver 3 in the game against the Packers was Khalif Raymond. The reason why that was the case is because Isaac Tesla was dealing with an illness most of the week, so the Lions didn't feel that it would be good to put him in a position to be the primary role guy for that number 3 position. Well, that's not going to be the case this week. The Lions are already saying that they're looking to increase his role. They're looking to increase the amount of plays he's going to get. Well, if you don't have Kyler Gordon out there, guarding a 6'4", 220-pound wide receiver that can run like a gazelle, and by the way, can also make Odell Beckham Jr. catches, that's going to have a pretty damn big impact. And like I said, Kyler Gordon is almost certainly not going to play. Now, for TJ Edwards, where this is a problem is TJ Edwards is their middle linebacker. He's the guy that primarily holds the green dot responsibilities. Well, think about it this way. The guy is in the middle of the defense, right? Which means he's the quarterback of the defense. Well, if your quarterback of the defense is out, that now means you've got to look to somebody else to lead. Now, for the Bears, they do have somebody to fill that responsibility. They have a guy by the name of Tremaine Edwards. Tremaine Edwards is a pretty damn good linebacker. But the problem is that when you do not have the guy that you're looking for as far as the main middle linebacker guy, that's going to be a problem. Because, you have Tremaine Edwards, but you don't have TJ out there. That's a problem. You don't have the main guy out there. So now you're going to have to rely on somebody else to fill down in the middle of that field, middle of that defense. Well, when you've now got a 6', 230-pound massive hole now in the middle of that defense, again, I've said this before, but where do the Lions love to attack on offense? They love attacking the middle of the field, whether it's running the ball or whether it's throwing the ball. Well, now, if your middle linebacker is not going to play, that's going to pose a huge problem for the Bears' defense. And again, you also now don't have Gordon likely playing again, which now means, hey, your wide receiver 3 can now go over the middle as well, along with guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, guys like Jameson Williams, guys like Sam Laporta, and we can now start flooding the middle of that defense with receivers. Now, obviously, that also bears in mind that the middle of our offensive line, Ratledge and Mahogany, they have to do a better job of being able to pass block. And I believe that they will. Because again, that goes back to the Lions getting better and figuring out where they went wrong, as I said earlier in the episode. But to me, the thing about it is that if there's one thing I know about the Lions taking what happened against the Packers and improving upon it, if that does happen, which I think it will, that's going to give Goff, again, going back to the main point I made earlier, the first one, it will give Goff a bunch of great opportunities to throw the ball in the middle of the field, whether it's with play action passing, because I believe we're going to have a better run game this week, or with regular passing. The point I'm indeed making here is that with the Lions coming home for their home opener, and they're going to be coming into this game angry and determined against a Bears team, they're going to be welcoming back their former offensive coordinator, so there's going to be a little bit of a revenge factor there. There's going to be a little bit of wanting to prove him wrong factor there, which is also against a Bears team that, okay, mind you, they played on Monday night, so they're going to get a whole less day to prepare against us. They're going to get one whole less day to recover against us. That also is a great factor that benefits the Lions, that gives them an advantage. So to me, it's like, okay, Goff knowing how he's going to play against Dennis Allen's defense. The fact that the Lions are already making strides to improve things where they went wrong because they know what went wrong and they know how to address them. The fact that the Bears have a number of major injuries in their defense that's going to also help the Lions. The fact that the Bears are playing on a short week. The fact that the Lions are in their first home opener of the season. All of these things point to the fact of the Lions having a bounce-back game on offense. Now, understand what I'm saying there. I am not at all saying that the Lions are going to curb stomp them on offense. I'm not at all saying they're going to have an offensive explosion. Could that happen? It might. Unlikely, but it might. Rather, what I am saying is that chances are it's going to be a definitively solid performance. I expect a solid offensive performance. I expect a major improvement. I'm not expecting fireworks. That is the difference. So, you take this information with what you will and go with it from there. But that's my point, or rather my points, and that's my episode. So, having said that, I'm going to end this and say thank you all for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. Also encourage y'all please to do one of these three things: like, comment, and subscribe. If by chance you've subscribed in the past and you forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and you also forgot to do so, I want to highly encourage y'all please to make sure you hit that bell notification icon so that way you guys never miss any more content that I push out. If you like the content, I hope to gain your subscription also. If you also, I just want to say this. If you have something in your life that makes you happy, makes you smile, hold on to it to dear life because those are the things that truly matter. Hope all y'all are doing well. And until the next time we meet, I just want to say God bless and go Lions.